It came to my attention that my parents had been misusing my $300,000 trust fund to provide for my sister. Upon revealing this discovery, they flew into a rage and kicked me out of our home. To give you some background, my sister Samantha has Down syndrome and is 4 years my senior. As long as I can remember, I've been aware that Samantha was different from me in many respects. Even in my early childhood, I observed that Samantha's reactions to situations were always intense. When things didn't go her way, even in the smallest of matters, her cries and tears were far more dramatic than most children's. It was as if she was unable to cope with the frustration of unmet expectations. Growing up, Samantha didn't have any friends. She struggled to interpret social cues and often appeared blunt or even discourteous. Although she wasn't intentionally rude, her straightforwardness could be unsettling for other kids who didn't grasp her condition. Consequently, many children preferred to keep their distance, which made her feel isolated. Therefore, my parents made it a point to involve me in her social life, constantly reminding me to include her when I went out with my friends. I understood they wanted her to feel included and have someone to interact with, so I didn't object to bringing my older sister along. I thought it would be great for her to have some company and maybe even make some friends through my social connections. However, socializing with Samantha and my friends was challenging. Her social skills were underdeveloped, and she found it hard to fit into groups. Her behavior was often unpredictable. She would sometimes push or even hit other children, especially if they possessed something she desired. As time passed, my friends became less enthusiastic about hanging out with me if Samantha was present. They didn't want to deal with her erratic behavior, and I understood their perspective. They were just kids wanting to play without disruptions or outbursts of anger. Samantha's impatience and tendency to lash out created difficulties for everyone, and I couldn't blame my friends for avoiding those situations. I recognized my responsibility as her sister to support and be there for Samantha, particularly given her challenges. But frankly, I also needed space to grow, establish my own friendships, and live my own life. Yet, my parents never allowed me to be myself. Whenever I wished to do something on my own or spend time with my friends without Samantha, they would make me feel guilty for even considering leaving her. They would say things like, "Sisters should always stick together," or, "You need to think about Samantha, she's your sister." It was as if they expected me to constantly prioritize her over my friends or anyone else, regardless of my own desires or needs. To make matters worse, they didn't seem to invest the same effort in helping Samantha learn to modify her behavior or improve her social abilities. They never took the time to explain to her how sharing or showing compassion could help her connect with others more effectively. Instead, they appeared to assume that I would naturally fill all the gaps in her social life. Thus, over the years, I became Samantha's default and only friend. Please understand, I love Samantha. She's family, and I know none of this is her fault. I realize she faces her own unique set of challenges every day, and I can't imagine what it's like to walk in her shoes. But at the same time, do you know what it feels like to be the invisible child in a family? My parents' entire world revolved around Samantha, with every decision, thought, and penny aimed at making her life easier and more comfortable. Samantha needs constant attention and specialized care. My parents have spent a fortune on her numerous therapies over the years, including physiotherapy for her physical coordination, speech therapy to enhance her communication, and occupational therapy to foster her motor skills and independence. She also has regular checkups, medical tests, and evaluations to monitor her progress and manage her health. The level of care she requires is substantial and time-consuming, and while I fully appreciate its importance, it often felt like there was little room for me. One of Samantha's particular difficulties is her lack of impulse control, which makes understanding boundaries a challenge. For example, she is fixated on the color pink and adores anything pink. She's instantly drawn to anything in that color and feels compelled to grab it, hold onto it, and not let go. Whether it's a pink purse, a teddy bear, an item of clothing, or someone else's treasured possessions, it doesn't matter. Once she has it, she clutches it tightly, and if anyone tries to take it away, she erupts into tears, sometimes escalating into a full-blown tantrum. This tendency has led to many awkward situations, especially when we are out in public. My parents often have to negotiate with people or purchase these pink trinkets from complete strangers just to calm Samantha down. I've witnessed them pay for a variety of bizarre pink items, some of which are worthless to us but mean everything to my sister in that moment. I get why they do it, and I understand it's more than just a preference. It's practically a compulsion she can't control. However, watching my parents dedicate so much time, money, and emotional energy to appeasing her urges and fulfilling her demands has left me feeling overlooked. Moreover, my parents' approach to parenting Samantha has had serious repercussions over the years. Their method of keeping her content has morphed into what I can only describe as a shopping addiction for Samantha. It started innocently enough. Every weekend, my parents would buy her something pink, a toy, a piece of jewelry, or some other knick-knack, to keep her happy and as a bargaining chip for her cooperation during the week. They would tell Samantha she had to be a good girl if she wanted them to give her whatever she wanted, and she would agree instantly. What began as a temporary measure quickly became a deeply ingrained family custom. These purchases are far from cheap. Many of the items Samantha desires are unique or custom-made, often requiring a significant financial outlay. For a long time, I didn't dwell on the expense of all this pink stuff, assuming my parents could afford it. I never questioned how they managed to sustain this habit week after week, year after year, but soon, I stumbled upon a truth I never could have imagined. My parents weren't managing their finances through careful budgeting or savings. They were resorting to fraud to cover these ever-increasing costs. You see, when I was born, my grandparents established trust funds for both Samantha and me, with equal amounts allocated to each of us. Samantha, with her Down syndrome, was meant to use her funds for therapies and whatever else she might need, while mine was intended for college or a down payment on a house. Only my parents had access to these funds, but my grandparents trusted them to manage the money responsibly. They also made sure Samantha and I knew about these trust funds from a young age, so we could count on them for financial security. It was a thoughtful gift from my grandparents, and I always felt reassured knowing the trust fund would be there when the time came. When Samantha turned 18, she received her portion of the trust money. Since she still lived with and depended on my parents, they took charge of managing her funds. Over the years, they've used her trust fund to help cover her treatments and therapies, which have become more intensive as she's grown older. The money has helped with everything from her medical care to providing the resources she needs for daily living. I understood that the money was meant to meet her needs, and I never questioned how it was being spent. When I turned 18, I was looking forward to receiving my half of the trust fund, as promised. I had already planned to use the money for my college tuition, and once that was covered, I intended to save the rest for any future expenses as I became an adult. I had my future mapped out and was relying on that fund to help me establish a stable path forward, but little did I know my hopes were about to be shattered. My grandparents threw me a wonderful 18th birthday party last week, just as they had done for Samantha when she turned 18. So I had been eagerly anticipating my own celebration. They had invited everyone in our family, and I was genuinely happy, surrounded by people I loved, on a day when everything felt perfect. After cutting the cake, my grandparents made an announcement to everyone gathered. They told me how proud they were to see me grown up and heading off to college, and that as a birthday gift this year, I would receive the trust fund they had set up for me years ago. The entire room erupted in cheers and applause, with everyone congratulating me on this incredible gift. I felt a wave of elation and gratitude wash over me as I hugged and thanked my grandparents for everything. Yet, amidst all the excitement, I noticed that my parents were the only ones who didn't seem happy. While everyone else was smiling and congratulating me, my parents stood to the side, looking strained and almost uneasy. I saw them exchanging glances, and though they didn't say anything, There was an obvious discomfort about them that was hard to ignore. It struck me as odd, but in the thrill of the celebration, I didn't give it much thought. I wanted to enjoy the rest of the party, so I pushed it to the back of my mind. Later that evening, after we got home from the party, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. My parents seemed tense and weren't talking to me much. Usually they were preoccupied with Samantha's health, mood, or needs, but that night Samantha seemed perfectly content, playing with one of her new gifts. Sensing that something else was going on, I finally asked my parents if anything was wrong. That's when my father gave me a serious look and told me that he and my mother needed to speak with me alone. The tone of his voice immediately sent chills down my spine. I knew it was serious. We sat down together in the living room, and they exchanged troubled glances before my father began to speak. He explained, almost hesitantly, that they wouldn't be able to give me my trust fund as my grandparents had planned. At first, I didn't understand what he meant, so I asked him to clarify. My father continued, his voice filled with shame and despair. He revealed that over the years they had depleted not only Samantha's trust fund, but also mine. To my shock, he admitted they had used a significant portion of the money to purchase a luxury yacht. With a heavy sigh, he confessed that 90% of my trust fund was already gone, leaving very little for me. I was stunned as I processed what he had just said. The money that was meant for my future, for my education, was gone. He went on to justify that the yacht was meant to provide therapeutic experiences for Samantha, claiming that time on the water would be beneficial for her condition. However, I later learned the yacht had barely been used. As his words sank in, a wave of numbness washed over me. My mind raced, trying to comprehend how this could have happened without my knowledge. They had emptied my trust fund without informing me, to cover Samantha's expenses and whims. I questioned why they would do something like this to me. My parents began to justify their actions, their words laced with defensiveness. They told me that caring for Samantha had been incredibly expensive, but they had no choice. Her needs had always come first. My father talked about the endless costs, the therapies, treatments, and of course the countless pink gifts she needed every week to stay calm. I argued that a luxury yacht was an unnecessary and extravagant expense that had nothing to do with Samantha's care or my future. However, they insisted that for Samantha, these items were more than just luxuries. They were essential for her to manage and make sense of her world, and to them, every penny spent had been worth it. They simply couldn't deny her those things at that point. I felt a surge of rage building inside me. I challenged them on how they could justify spending almost everything meant for my future without even consulting me. Didn't I matter to them? My father tried to placate me, saying I needed to understand what they had been through. He spoke of the stress they had endured, the sacrifices they had made as Samantha's caregivers, and how difficult it was to meet her needs week after week. My mother nodded, adding that Samantha's condition demanded constant care, and sometimes that meant spending money in ways that might seem unfair to me, but were crucial for Samantha. Both of them felt that because I didn't have any of Samantha's disabilities, I was already at an advantage compared to her, and therefore I shouldn't be so resentful about the money. A tear of frustration rolled down my cheek as I assured them that I wasn't questioning Samantha's needs or their decision to prioritize her care. I loved her too, but this was about their dishonesty, how they had gone behind my back and taken what was supposed to be my future without even thinking I deserved to know. I told them that this trust fund had been my only safety net, the one thing I felt I could rely on to start my independent life, and now it was almost entirely gone. Instead of addressing how upset and betrayed I felt, they started gaslighting me, turning the focus back on me. They expressed disappointment that I couldn't be more understanding and that, as Samantha's sister, I should realize that sacrifices are sometimes necessary. We're all in this together, they declared. I was astounded that they expected me to just accept it all, to play the fool and believe that Samantha's needs must always come first, no questions asked. I demanded to know why it was always about Samantha and never about me. Didn't they want me to achieve anything in my life? That's when my parents unveiled a plan they had for my future, which revolved entirely around me taking on the responsibility of caring for Samantha. They explained that they had never prioritized my education because it wasn't that important. They expected me to step up and help them with Samantha's financial and emotional needs. My mother looked at me with a mix of pleading and resignation, saying, "You know, we're getting older, and it's exhausting looking after Samantha. We won't be able to do this forever, so we need you to take over." She went on to say that they were fine with me attending a local college instead of my preferred university, hoping I would get a stable job as soon as I graduated so I could have Samantha live with me. "Then we can finally rest," she said. Dad suggested I start contributing financially even while in college by working part-time and sending money home for Samantha. He claimed it would help Samantha gain some independence by allowing her to buy whatever pink things she wanted and maintain the lifestyle they had provided for her. I sat there, speechless, trying to process what my parents expected me to do. At that moment, I felt utterly deceived and disillusioned. This was not the future I had imagined for myself. It seemed my parents expected me to simply abandon my own ambitions and plans to seamlessly step into their shoes as Samantha's caregiver, without ever asking what I wanted for my own life. Finally, I exploded at them, my voice trembling with years of pent-up anger and hurt. "Have you ever even considered what I want? Or am I just here to live for Samantha?" I yelled. "You never even bothered to ask me what I wanted, did you? All these years I've been expected to just give, and now you're pushing me to become Samantha's caretaker so you can retire. How is any of this fair?" My voice cracked as the fury poured out. "You're making decisions for my life without even considering what it means for me. I can't just drop everything for Samantha and pretend my dreams don't matter." All my bottled-up resentment erupted. Years of feeling invisible, years of being told I needed to prioritize Samantha, and years of watching them indulge her every whim while I was expected to quietly support from the sidelines. My parents constantly try to convince me that I'm being selfish and inconsiderate. It's as if they want me to conform and embrace a life I never chose, simply because they believe it's what's best for Samantha. So since last week, I've been completely ignoring my parents, and I'm on my way to tell my grandparents everything right now. Since the trust fund was created with their money, I believe it's crucial to have their support as I address this issue. After I've explained everything to them, I plan to let my grandparents decide how we should proceed. I trust their judgment and know they have my best interests at heart as we figure out how to handle this together. I had kept quiet all this time because I genuinely believed my parents would eventually see reason, but it's clear that they haven't. It's been 2 weeks. I told my grandparents everything, and they were as astounded as I was to learn that my parents had used my trust fund without my permission. That same week, my grandparents confronted my parents about what had happened to my trust fund. My grandparents had worked hard to establish the fund for both Samantha and me, deeply committed to ensuring we had the financial resources for our futures. They were understandably furious when they discovered that my parents had illegally drained the money behind their backs. My parents tried to justify their actions to my grandparents, claiming the yacht was a necessary investment for Samantha's well-being. However, their excuses fell flat when my grandfather demanded to see proof of how often the yacht had actually been used for Samantha's benefit. They even dared to ask my grandparents to understand why they did what they did, as if their justifications could somehow excuse their actions. But my grandfather would have none of it. He roared at them, his voice filled with fury and disbelief. He told them unequivocally that they were responsible for repaying the entire trust fund, regardless of the circumstances or their rationalizations. He was visibly enraged and felt betrayed by my parents' conduct. For a moment, I hoped they would finally accept responsibility and make things right. Then, fearfully, my mother approached my grandparents and began pleading with them. She emphasized how difficult caring for Samantha was, highlighting her numerous and constant needs. She claimed that Samantha's trust fund was inadequate to cover the escalating costs of her treatments and ongoing expenses. She justified taking my trust fund by arguing it helped them care for Samantha. Then, in an almost unbelievable twist, my parents turned on me. They reprimanded me for telling my grandparents everything, upset that I had exposed their actions and forced them to face the consequences. My dad, in particular, was furious. He told me, with a sharp edge in his voice, that I should consider myself lucky for being born normal, unlike Samantha, and that I shouldn't resent my sister so much. It was as if my entire life, my challenges, and my needs were irrelevant. Everything revolved around Samantha, and now I was being punished for not fitting into the role they had carved out for me. Without hesitation, I looked them in the eye and stated plainly that if they didn't return the money they owed me, I would sue them and ensure they went to jail for their actions. I reminded them that what they had done was illegal and indefensible in court. They couldn't deny that the trust fund was explicitly for me and me alone. My tone was calm, but my words were clear and firm. I saw the color drain from my parents' faces as they grasped what I had just said. For the first time, I genuinely stood up for myself, and I could see the shock in their eyes. They were not used to me being so direct. Fortunately, my grandparents nodded in agreement, supporting me because they knew I was right. Encouraged by their support, I continued, speaking with even greater conviction. I told my parents that it didn't matter how much they spent on Samantha or what they did for her. Samantha was their child, and it wasn't my responsibility to sacrifice my future for her. I loved Samantha, of course, and I would always be there for her, but I wasn't willing to give up my own life, education, and goals just to make her feel cared for. I made it clear that I was done with always coming second to her, of being overlooked while her needs were always prioritized. I concluded by declaring I was done with them. I had had enough of being treated like the invisible child, expected to meekly accept whatever scraps were left for me. For the first time in my life, I stood my ground and I knew I could never take it back. My parents had pushed me to my breaking point, and I was not going to let them continue to dictate my life. My father immediately objected, his voice filled with shock and anger, insisting I couldn't threaten them with jail. He told me that as their child, I should have family loyalty and be willing to support them at all times, especially after everything they had done for me over the years. His words were meant to guilt me and remind me of my supposed obligations to them. My mother, trying to defuse the situation, even dared to suggest that since there was still 10% of my trust fund remaining, I could simply accept it and keep quiet. It felt like they were treating me like a charity case, as if the leftover crumbs from my trust fund were all I deserved and I should just forget about everything else. But my grandfather refused to back down. He interjected, his voice stern, and informed my parents that if they didn't agree to repay the full amount, he would hire the best lawyer in town to sue them. The prospect of legal action seemed to have a significant impact on my parents. They finally fell silent, realizing my grandfather meant business. After a tense exchange, they reluctantly admitted that what they had done was wrong. Nonetheless, they begged my grandparents for some time to consider things further. However, the repercussions didn't end there. My father was furious with me for exposing them to my grandparents and threatening him and Mom with jail time. In his rage, he declared he never wanted to see my face again. He ordered me to leave his house, stating he was done supporting a selfish person like me, someone who could betray their own family like this. When my grandparents heard this, they immediately offered to have me move in with them. They assured me that I always had a home with them, and that they would support me in every way they could as I figured out my next steps. So, without hesitation, I packed my belongings, gathered my important documents, and moved out of my parents' house. Currently, I live with my grandparents. I hate that my parents have kicked me out, but I'm also relieved to be away from them. I miss Samantha a lot. I'm aware that what I did has permanently damaged my relationship with my family, but I do not regret standing up for myself. It's been a month. After considerable pressure and legal threats from my grandfather, my parents finally signed an agreement drafted by his lawyer. The terms were manageable because they couldn't repay the entire sum they had taken from me in one lump payment. Instead, they would make installments over the next 18 months. This would give them time to gradually repay the loan without causing immediate financial strain. However, the agreement included a crucial stipulation: if they missed any payment deadline or failed to follow through at all, my grandparents and I had the right to initiate immediate legal action. This clause served as a safeguard, ensuring they couldn't avoid repaying me. My parents are still angry with me. They blame me for everything that has happened, and it seems they are unable to let go of their anger or humiliation. They still don't understand why I took the actions I did and stood up for myself so dramatically. Despite their animosity, my grandmother has reassured me that none of this is my fault. She reiterated today that I did what I needed to do to protect myself and my future, and that I should focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. I see Samantha occasionally. She misses me, and I miss her too. She often asks about me, and it's clear she doesn't grasp the full picture, but she understands enough to sense that something significant has occurred between us. She's noticed I'm not around as much as I used to be, and that my parents did something to hurt me. It's heartbreaking not to be able to help her understand how toxic our parents are. Regardless, I'll always be there for her. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.